Well, thanks everyone for coming back to another Breaking into Data session. I'm Filous, founder of Promotable and your host for tonight's session. Today I have with me co-host Scott Adams, and of course our guest for tonight, Alejandra Budar. Before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. So first of all, Promotable, who are we? And Breaking into Data, what do we do, right? So we're a community where accomplished data professionals share knowledge and advice to inspire the next generation of data talent. So we do that through a variety of ways, but primarily it's through events like this, where we bring accomplished professionals. That could be someone who's been working in the field for 3 years. It could be someone who's been working in the field for 25. Ultimately, we want someone who's actually done it, been there, and we want to create that opportunity for everyone to ask all those burning questions that you have about what it takes to get there, what do you do, all that kind of stuff. Please get your questions ready, and we'll get to them as we get going. Second thing, for those of you who are not technical yet, but want to dip your toes in the water, you might be in marketing or product or what have you. We have a data course for business, we'll say, but really people want to add data to their toolkit. So you learn things like SQL and Tableau and more. That's 5 hours a week, taught by practitioners just like our speakers. Feel free to go to promotable.io to check that out if interested. And also, coming up in Q2, we have a program as well for folks who are finished with either your data science bootcamp or master's degree, and you want some help landing that next opportunity. We have a product as well, basically a collection of course, mentors, and then projects with our corporate partners, and learning how to recruiting and network and that sort of thing. That'll be launching next year. I'll have more information about that. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce Alejandra. She is, really smart, really great person, obviously, otherwise she wouldn't be here, and super interesting data journey. So I want to just hand it off to you and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'll take it from there.
Cool. Well, thank you, Aaron and Promotable for inviting me on, and thank you for everybody for joining. My name is Alejandra. I am a data scientist at LinkedIn. I work specifically on the economic graph team. A little bit about myself. I am from San Diego, California. So I have a bachelor's in public health from Santa Clara University. I was pre-med and wanted to become a physician assistant. And then I decided I was not going to do that was not what I actually wanted to do with my life. And I took a gap year in Italy and then moved to Spain and did a master's degree from that I got from the University of Barcelona in big data science. So yeah, that's what.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely biased as someone who also got an undergraduate degree in something I'm never going to use again. In my case, it's political science, but the transitioning to staff, like many of you, I always like to meet other people who are doing similar stuff. But so I guess the first question on my end is so you kind of went through that gap year, kind of how did you figure out like, hey, I want to do data? Was it like you were in Italy and you're like, this is what I want? Or was it kind of like a slow kind of progression towards you had an idea, but kind of like figure out what that path looked like?
Yeah, so after college, I got a job at Apple's Wellness Center that they have on campus, and I was working really closely with a lot of Apple tech, and I saw how it just sort of revolutionized healthcare experience and how you could use tech to improve a lot of antiquated industries like the healthcare space. And so I started thinking about, so I guess I knew I wanted to do something tech related. I didn't really know what data science was. I didn't know that was what I was going to go into. I just wanted to do something that was kind of general and that I could apply to multiple industries in case I didn't want to end up going to the healthcare space. And so while in Italy, I was reflecting and doing research on what sort of coding skills to get. And I realized that what I really wanted to do was data science. And so the program that I applied to in Barcelona was actually specific for people transitioning from a non-technical background. So I more so fell into this program. And then throughout this program, I was given the tools that I needed, which then happened to be data science.
Very cool. So I know a lot of times I always ask folks who do, whether it's a master's degree or boot camp or what have you, of the stuff that you learned, what kind of, especially the hard skills, which are the ones that you use primarily now in your day-to-day?
I absolutely use SQL every day. Python is not so common. I rarely use it. And as I was applying recently after the pandemic, I realized that actually SQL, I feel like, is the most up and coming skill that is most required in all job postings at any level, especially if you're working at a larger company. Those databases are going to be accessible through SQL mostly.
Something I preach.
Yes, you do. It's totally true. Actually, one of the conversations I had with someone who actually ran a lot of bootcamp courses and went to industry and started hiring his students. He said that they, we'll put it politely, weren't as good as he expected in SQL. He used different words, yeah. But no, it's true, right? I think this is my personal opinion. I think we get kind of stuck on like the fancy tools, and sometimes you're doing fun like machine learning and TensorFlow and all these big buzzwords. But more often than not, what I hear, and I don't know if like you've had like different experiences at other companies, but like SQL is like the thing that like if you have to have like be really strong in that, and that's like for most people like where they spend much of their time on. But I think it'd actually be really interesting. I'm not sure how much you can share about the work that you do, but I feel like what you do is a little bit more unique compared to like a lot of other, I mean, I guess every data science role is unique to an extent, but I feel like what you do is a little bit more interesting. I don't know, would you be able to share kind of what your day-to-day looks like, or at a high level what you do as a data scientist at LinkedIn?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the work that my team does is actually, all of you would probably have seen it. A lot of times it's all the editorial pieces that LinkedIn puts out, or if you've seen us say like, oh, hiring is increasing in the healthcare industry by tenfold. That's sort of the type of work that my team does. So we take the data that we have on members or industries or what have you that LinkedIn collects, and then we try and make inferences about how the economy is doing, or look to like for trends within the greater economy. My day-to-day is sort of, it varies quite a bit. Currently, it's mostly, so working in SQL exclusively and accessing data and cleaning it and all the typical data science fun stuff that you get to do, but also working with partners in editorial and in our comms department to then be able to communicate and get this. So I would do the analysis, for example, and then communicate with my partners. This is what I found. Do you think we can write a story on this? And then work with them to supply them any extra data points that they need. And then we write up the story and share it with the LinkedIn community so that they're also informed about what's going on in the economy.
That's so cool. At least for me, I'm a nerd, so I love, like, I think my and this is just my personal soapbox, but for me, I feel like most of the time it's like really hardcore like stat stuff, or like stuff that's like less connected to like either a business, or in this case like the poli-sci kid in me is like, oh, that's really cool. But I think it's always fun to be able to actually like connect it to something that's like tangible.
Definitely. I think that's my favorite thing about data science. Is like it's immediate. Like the millennial in me loves that it's an immediate reward, and then it's tangible, and I can see like the piece, and I can see people interacting with it, or like the comments, and they get like a lot of benefit from it, which is always really nice.
Is that like for you like the main? I'm not, obviously like, you know, I'm sure it's also just interesting, but is that like one of like the bigger pieces that for you that kind of drove you to diving into data, or was that something you figured out like a long way afterwards?
I love the immediateness of it, just because in medicine, for example, it's not so immediate. You could have a patient and you don't know if it worked, or if it didn't work, you don't see that results until like months, maybe years later. So definitely liked that aspect, but I also like the fact that with data, it's applicable to all and any industries. And I'm a very curious person. I have many interests, hence why I went from like healthcare to tech. So that's the nice part, is that I can work with all types of data, healthcare data, financial data, and really get to explore my multifaceted self.
I definitely hear you on that. If someone looked at my resume, they would think I'm crazy. So I've totally been there. Are there things that like, obviously, you know, I think there's a lot of people here who are either trying to like land their first data science job, or, you know, maybe trying to level up. But, you know, what are things that you've picked up like now that you've been doing this for a while, that you're like, oh, actually, this is the thing that's like really important to be successful, is a little bit too, you know, but you know, that's like generally speaking that like you realize, oh, this is actually something that I wish I knew 2 years ago I wish was like covered in my master's program or something like that?
Yeah, I kind of wish I had understood better the definition between like data scientist and data analyst, and realized that like what I actually wanted to do at the beginning was more of a data analyst role. So I would have not wasted so much time focusing on like machine learning and the infrastructure and like Python. And when in reality, I should have been focusing on more like SQL and stats, and stuff like that. So I think that it's important to distinguish that as you're starting off or as you're trying to break into the sector, to really identify which one you want to do, because one is more infrastructure heavy and will require Python versus another one is maybe a little bit easier to do and it only requires like SQL and stats. But I think that people, at least people that I've encountered, sometimes think I can't enter tech because I don't check all of the boxes, but they don't realize that there are several roles within tech that at least you can cover some of them and the rest you learn on the job. So
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Is there something that you vividly remember like learning on the job, or was there like one thing that stuck out to you the first, like, I don't know, 6 months you were working, you're like, oh man, I don't know anything about this. I need to go do a lot of Googling. I know for me, I definitely had that. I'm not going to embarrass myself right now, but there's a lot of dumb things I did have to learn.
Actually, LinkedIn was it's my first job experience with SQL. Before this, I had only done it in theory in grad school, and I had worked with a nonprofit, but they didn't have enough data to need SQL, so I mostly used Python. But I was really shocked at like, one, how much you just learn. Like I was putting a lot of my pressure on myself, for example, to like know all of the SQL things. And then I realized that everyone Googles things all the time. Nobody knows all of the SQL like stuff, and Stack Overflow is there for a reason.
I was going to ask
And
about
then, oh yeah, all the time. But I think I'm like really proud about how more readable my code has become. Like I don't think that I realized that when I was in school that other coworkers will actually have to read this and like debug this. So like it's important to learn like how to write clean code, which I don't think was emphasized in school. But I think
that's a wonderful insight right there.
Yeah, definitely. So I think stuff like that, you don't need to know all of the things. You just need to have a really good foundation, I feel like, and then after that, then you can like the style of your code and everything else will just improve on its own.
Yeah, no, that I think definitely it's one of those things where if you want to improve, you will. Obviously, you'll learn very quickly, or someone will tell you should fix it.
Yeah. You'll get embarrassed. You'll be like, oh shoot, my code looks horrible compared to theirs. I probably should like take notes on what they do.
They put it on the big screen in the conference room. You're like, let's take this example here. Oh God.
It's a learning process though, right?
Yeah.
It's a skill that you develop over time to write clean code, but it is a skill. Definitely.
Definitely.
The message that I think message here, and also that I think we've heard in the past, is like you have to have a base level, but like you learn so much on the job that like you don't have to be perfect, kind of good enough. And that kind of transitions into nicely one of the questions from Alejandra, who just asked about your interviewing experience. I don't know if you can share or shed some light on what that process was like for you. Like, they're obviously always hard, but like, I don't know, how did you like learn from that, or become more comfortable, or prepare for all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think I did sign something saying I wouldn't like tell specifics about the interview process, but I could give a more general overview of it. And so
what we'll say is, sorry to cut you off. You don't need to dive into the LinkedIn interview process necessarily, because you can't share so much, but maybe if there were other interviews as well that you went through prior to LinkedIn, that's also an option as well. So I definitely want to make sure that's cool.
Perfect. Yeah. I think I was surprised at the level of like the fact that all the coding that I did for all the interviews were actually in SQL. I don't think I did any of them in Python. Maybe I had been asked like one or two questions about Python and how comfortable I was with it, or if I could talk about any projects that I had done with it, but no actually live coding questions. And I think that live coding is a skill in and of itself. Mm-hmm. I think that it's hard to like walk someone through and code while you're processing whatever the problem is that they asked you. So I think it's an important skill to have regardless, even if you're not interviewing, because as you become, a mentor, or as you start giving more technical presentations to other people, it's important to be able to communicate what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing. But I do think that I watched a lot of YouTube videos and did actually a few PM questions just to get myself thinking as a data scientist. I think that's the one thing that people might not necessarily work on when they're thinking about a DS interview, but a lot of it is also your critical thinking ability. Do you think as a data scientist, are you able to think about metrics in a given way and think about a product in numbers and in revenue, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what they're hiring you for. They don't really care about the percent increase. They want to know the percent increase in revenue, not necessarily in whatever metric you're looking at. So just learning how to communicate findings, I think, is really important. So that's one that I worked on that I thought was my strength, that I'm glad someone told me. It was in YouTube videos, but they told me virtually about it. So I think that's something that is often overlooked that people should definitely consider.
That fits in with a question that I'm seeing coming up, and I want to ask you if you could elaborate. What are some useful tips for communicating in an interview as a data scientist or data analyst to communicate your skills?
Yeah, so I definitely think it's important to write everything down. I think that one thing that I've learned from experience, there's nothing worse than sort of rambling as you're going, because then you yourself get lost. So I learned to write everything down that I'm having, organize them before speaking. But I guess in order to do that, I always think of things in terms of what the key output is, and then I break down that goal. So if the goal is to, I don't know, we want to increase the popularity of this product. Okay, then I break it down. What does increase mean? What percentage do we want? What does popularity mean? How we measure this? Yes, is create an overarching goal, and then from there break it down and compartmentalize it into more data science, tangible things that you can measure and communicate those findings.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned that specifically, but if there's one, most people think of it as a soft skill, but honestly, I think of it's this. I mean, whether I talk to someone who's in pure play data science, or they're at a director level, or they're on the analytics side, the answer is that's always one of the bigger takeaways is we'll say stakeholder management, if you will, understanding that, but also diving a little bit deeper into how do you communicate. It's understanding how to relate things to the business question, understanding how to break that down to a KPI, and all those kinds of things that you elaborated on. So I'm really happy that actually you dove into that, because I think it's something that we forget about, right? We're oh, let's make a machine learning algo. Let's use this really cool fun program. But then at the end of the day, we all have to pay the bill somehow.
Right, and then sorry to cut you off, but to add to that, also you're there to fill a role, right? So you're an intermediate. Your stakeholders only know so much, so you have to then help them. They might know about product, but then you have to be the one that's okay, with this data, I can only realistically, this is what it is, or whatever. So you have to really manage expectations with the tools you have, because you have more data available to you. They have this idea and this goal, but you're the kind of the bridge, whether you have to tell them whether it's realistic or not, or whether we have to go back to the drawing board about it.
How often does that happen? Because I feel it should happen a lot, because I feel at least from the more non-technical executive types that I've talked to, it's they know that there is data available. I know that we can do stuff with it, but often how far is the gap between here's what we want to do and when you get into the nitty-gritty, what you can actually do with the data, even if you have it, right? There's only so many different ways you can do stuff yourself.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it's it gets complicated with some projects also because you have the legality issues also. So at LinkedIn, for example, I know that some data legally you have to get it cleared before we're able to even start looking at it or analyzing it. And then you have to we do a risk assessment on okay, what are the issues of publishing this data? Will there be backlash or all those things? So I think that in any company, it's important to work with the teams, like it's really important to have a cohesive like legal team that works with, that communicates well with product and data to be able to know and like manage expectations. But I think that like, at least from my experience and from people that I've talked to, other friends who work in data science, I think that there's a lot of people trust data, like they trust like numbers. So a lot of the time it's like pretty on par. Like if it's like, hey, I did an analysis and it shows that this is only going to result in a 0 increase, then like they're more likely to listen to you because you have like a number attached with your yes or your no.
That's fair. Did you say earlier that when you were prepping for your interviews, you also studied like PM stuff, like product stuff?
Yeah, I did. I
was going to ask you if you would mind expanding on that, because I think talking about stakeholders, I mean, that's like something that you instinctively knew how to do. I guess how helpful was that for the interviews that you went through?
I think it was super helpful just to get yourself like in the mindset of a product, especially not having had that background and not having, I had never worked for like a company like Linked had like digital product, I guess. So, because I had just graduated school, right? And during the pandemic, which was obviously the perfect graduate. Instead, I took the time to just prep. So the PM interview stuff helped me get in the right mind frame, helped me start thinking about like what company because at the end of the day, a lot of DS roles work closely with, and so it's like they're not going to push a product unless they have the numbers that say it's doing well or that people respond well to it. So I think that that's also why it was super helpful, because then you're able to think like a PM. And so if you get a PM stakeholder you're working closely with and you're kind of more on par with their thinking, you're able to be like, okay, I see where you're coming from, but let me communicate it in a way that you'll understand that this is not going to work or that it will work or whatever the suggestion is.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are all really good points. Just a couple of questions that came in that I think we touched on a little bit earlier, but I want to just double down on. One question is just if you can talk about the differences between like the training you would do for a data science role versus an analyst role. And then second question is more along the lines of like, how much like theory versus practice do you need like to break in? In the sense that like I know a lot of boot camps are like, let me teach you how to like do this code. You don't have to understand everything about it. You just know how to get it done. Like how much of that do you need, or how much like theory do you need behind that?
Yeah, those are good questions. So I would define data analyst versus a data scientist as wait, let me preface that this is not Webster Dictionary like accurate.
Well, this is really your opinion, your thoughts are your own. This is not Lincoln's opinion or my opinion.
Perfect. But I would define like a data analyst as somebody who does more of like the stats and works with the data to, I would say like think of it like as a report. You're writing a report and you're just spitting out like percentages and numbers and what have you. But data scientists, I feel like, is a little bit more advanced because they can do machine learning. So that's like the main difference. Data analysts, you typically don't do machine learning, while data scientists could do machine learning. Doesn't have to be super advanced. It could be basic machine learning, but they still understand machine learning aspects and can do certain algorithms like regressions, for example, and usually have a little bit higher level stats and math in general, because that's required for machine learning, versus a machine learning engineer specifically works solely on machine learning, doesn't touch the data, doesn't do any of the cleaning or analysis, works on the algorithm and the infrastructure to maintain the algorithm. So I would say that a data scientist is like a nice medium between a data analyst and a data engineer, or machine learning engineer.
Yeah, I love that you dive into like those differences, because we like, I think in the kind of community of people who are trying to get their first data job, I think, or maybe it's just in the marketing, like data science is like the sexiest job. We forget about like the engineers, the ML people, the data viz people. I think we can keep going, but
yeah, there's a lot of them, and so I think that for each also like more theory. There's a different balance between theory and practice. I think like machine learning engineers require a lot of theory and a lot of practice, because no top company is going to trust you with their AI algorithm if you like don't really know, if you've never worked on an AI algorithm before and you don't understand everything, all the complicated nuances of like maintaining it. Versus data analyst, I feel like doesn't require as much theory. It's more like you need to know how to code and how to do basic math. I feel like percentages, percent increases. Versus data science, you definitely need stats at least, and you need to have a good foundation of technical skills, especially because like it changes, it varies depending on the company how well developed their tools are. So in some cases, like at a startup, you might need to do all of the things and need to understand all of the stats as a data scientist, versus if you go to another company that's larger, has better built tools, you just need to understand the outputs. You don't really need to be able to do the inputs. So yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, no, it's nice also to have that contrast, because it's always like super different. Like when you're at a startup and you're like a data team of like 2, you do everything.
Yeah.
Because, if you're at like, I don't know, American Express, and you're one of like 1,000 data people, you've got a much like smaller purview. What about, we've got a question on how much SQL knowledge you need. Obviously, it's hard to like quantify that or put a number on it, but are there like so maybe like certain like functions that like you absolutely have to be able to do, like that you'd use like every day, that kind of thing, that like if people don't know that, they can probably go and watch some YouTube videos?
Yeah, I think joins are essential, like understanding left join, right join, inner join, the difference, and like the on clauses, which ones to include. I think that the most issues I have all the time, like my debugging and my own code, is like with joins, because I myself, since I'm doing so many joins, that I like lose track of like what I'm joining on. But I think that it's important. Like joins are essential, and I think that at least once you have a good foundation in that, then it becomes a little bit easier to break into the industry.
For me, my biggest problem, as always, like forgetting a semicolon somewhere. It's something stupid that totally derails me.
Yeah, also very true.
How long does that set you back? You have to like, you're sitting there reading it for like half an hour until you realize
it's one little thing, yeah. But
why so stupid? It's like I'm so smart yet so dumb. That's like, I mean, for me, it's every now and then I'm like, oh god. Here's a question that comes up a lot. How important is domain knowledge or business knowledge compared to the technical knowledge we'll say for a data analyst role? And I think the question should be reframed less in terms of like how one versus the other, but more like we assume everyone can probably do. If you're applying for these roles, you probably know some SQL, you probably have some stats, but like how relevant is the business knowledge component to there?
I think it's pretty essential. That's why I was doing like the PM stuff, so I could get more of a business knowledge, because I don't have a business background. I think you can learn on the job. I don't think you absolutely need it in order to break into the industry, but I do think that it's important skill to grow as you get in, because it's important to be able to communicate your tech findings, like I said, in a business oriented manner. Otherwise, you could have the fanciest algorithm, the highest precision analysis, and if you're not able to communicate that to stakeholders in a language that they understand, in this case business, then it doesn't matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think we all have that experience where you want to show your boss something, you're like, it's really cool, I've done this thing, and then you watch their eyes glaze over, and then like you lost within the first like 2 minutes, and then you're talking for 10 and you realize it doesn't matter, like they're not going to get it, and so you're like, making more money, and they're like, no.
Right, yeah, and so then you take note, right, when those things happen. You're okay, next time I'll dial down like the algorithm speech and I'll increase the revenue speech, or vice versa.
Exactly. Next time I'm not going to show them the spreadsheet.
Yeah, no, don't share the numbers ever. Make a visualization. That's what I've learned. Like, way easier to communicate things.
What's your data viz tool of choice?
I actually don't do much of it at my current role, but before I would use oh shoot, what's it called? It's like the super popular Tableau. Oh, I love Tableau.
Power BI. And then the rest of like some small ones as well that we've used in the past, like Chart.io, I think is one. There's some people that use
Oh, I've
Looker.
heard of it, yeah.
I've never used any of like the really enterprise ones. Like there's Looker, there's a couple other ones that like they don't have as many like off the shelf like for personal use kind of things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love Tableau, like the drag and drop stuff. Like that's it's like so easy.
Oh yeah, it's pretty, which is like Power BI is like functionally more or less the same, right? The way what I tell people usually is like if you get that for free, if your company pays for the Microsoft Office suite, you probably get Power BI. Like use it. But I think Tableau's
that's fair.
Tableau's prettier, and
Yeah,
if you're currently a student, you can get it for free. So all you need is a good .edu address with like I think I'm not even sure if it's some of the transcripts. So for anyone who's trying to get that, I think that's definitely a good option.
Yeah.
Here's a question. I'm actually not sure if it's something that you would be able to answer, but we'll ask anyway. Do you have any interaction with like database administrators, or generally is that like something that like I don't know if you have like how like cross-functional your team is, but
not really, just because like the people who maintain our databases, they're usually like their own team, just because like LinkedIn is so big. So I don't, thankfully, don't need to like manage that. Like if something crashes, I don't need to be like woken up at like midnight to fix it. But I do think that like obviously like in smaller startups, you're wearing multiple hats, and you probably don't have as much data either. So like you're managing maybe like a AWS like cloud system, so it's not super difficult and challenging to do.
Yeah.
But no, not necessarily. So as a data in general, I feel like we usually don't need to deal with like databases and maintain. You usually have an engineer.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So someone else is just asking for basic like good SQL resources to learn. Obviously, YouTube, W3 schools. What else do you recommend? And Scott, you can also chime in.
Yeah. I feel like I use W3 like the most, like all the time, like and not even like I would just play around with their database. Like I started remembering like their columns and like would just start playing around with it and not even read their little blurbs. I would just go directly into their database and start playing with like their data and doing stuff.
Yeah, Mode Analytics has a nice online database system too. I'm also a fan of just taking SQLite databases, which you can download on your computer and getting a copy of DB Visualizer and running it in there. So there's a lot of different options.
Yeah, there's that. Data Camp's an option too. I mean, what's the other one that I've played with? There's a lot of like basic SQL editors out there that basically give you enough room to play, especially browser-based tools. Like Mode's a really good one, I think, at least for like free, easy things that don't involve much setup. Because then you can like you're not going to crash your computer if you do something stupid. Where if you're opening up your terminal and having some fun, something may or may not, you could do something dumb.
I want to talk about it.
Exactly. Here's a question. So going deeper into like having like a business or domain knowledge, like how do you know which one to look at? And this person's curious, like, is it better to get like a day job to get the domain knowledge before you break into data? I think there's not. I think it's like a chicken and egg problem there. I don't know. That's like a real answer. I don't know if there's like a perfect answer, but yeah, like how would you recommend going about that?
Yeah, I talk to people often who pick me about like transitioning. They want to transition to DS, but they've spent like so many years in a specific industry, and they often think that it's like a waste. So like, what do I do with this now? I don't want to use I can't use this in tech. But I'm like, actually, do you realize that like all industries have data? So like, so a lot of people already have a lot of domain knowledge that I feel like they don't realize is super valuable. Like to have a data scientist, like if I were working in a healthcare space and I have a bachelor's in public health, like that's actually really valuable. So like domain knowledge, I guess, can be defined in many ways. It doesn't have to be like business. But I don't think you need a day job to be able to get the domain knowledge. A lot of they're hiring you for your data science skills, right? So like if they wanted you to have a sort of business background or something, I would have specified in the job description. So you don't necessarily need it to break in but like I would definitely take note as you're in the industry, and obviously you want to start picking it up. Like the better you understand the data that you're analyzing, the better you understand the context of like whatever it is you're doing, then it'll inform your analysis. So I don't think you need it. I don't think you need domain knowledge before the DS skills. You definitely need the DS skills before anything. Like they won't hire you otherwise.
Exactly. But it does help like for like differentiating yourself, and obviously I think kind of like you did, learning like PM stuff, right? Because your stakeholders are going to be PMs. Like understanding who your stakeholders are, there's always, it's nice when you can speak in that jargon. Someone else, Stack Overflow. I forgot to talk about that one. But yeah, Stack Overflow is definitely your friend. Kaggle is also your friend for data science stuff. If you're super new to data, you can always read stuff on Towards Data Science. It's a fun Medium blog that now kind of feels like it's like the same thing over and over again. But if you're totally new, there'll be stuff to learn.
Promotable is your friend.
Promotable is also your friend. Yes, shameless plug. Would you say, like, kind of like going back to the breaking in, would you say it was like the biggest, like, I don't know, challenge, like going through that like interview process? Was was it just like the technical stuff? Was it learning how to speak, like learning how to like talk to your stakeholder? Was it like learning your elevator pitch, like talk about your background? What would you say was like the more challenging, or was it all hard and you just had to figure it out?
No, I think the number one thing that I struggled with the most was like confidence. I think like even though I had a public health degree and like didn't really have a technical background before doing the master's program, and having a foreign degree, I think that I went into these interviews a little bit like insecure about myself and what I could bring to the table. And so I think that's what I struggled with. I think that impacted me to be like I had a like light bulb moment one day where I was like, wait a minute, like I'm bringing value to this company because I have an international background and because I am divergent in thinking and stuff. So I think that that's the number one thing I struggled with. And then the second one was coding and like speaking while coding. It's just like the thing. It's just the hardest thing to do. I feel it's like when somebody's watching you, like, you know, you're really good at something until somebody's watching you, and then all of a sudden you forget how to even do a select statement. But yeah.
My favorite is kind of like a related one where like something's not working, and then and then you're like, I've tried everything, I don't know what to do, and then someone comes over and it's like the simplest thing that like you thought you did but you actually didn't, and you're super embarrassed.
Yeah.
But here's a last question. Do you use models to present to your stakeholders? I think they're really just talking about how do you interact with your stakeholders. I guess before we even talk about that, is typically who are stakeholders for people in any sort of data role, I guess?
Yeah, I think it varies a lot. Data science is so diverse, and it depends on what team you're working on. Obviously, you could do like some. I know people who work in DS and sales. Some people work in marketing. Some people work in the ad space. So like your stakeholders and people you interact with on a daily will change. But I think models. I think if you're talking about AI models specifically, that's way too complicated to like show any like even a DS person for them to understand you in 10 minutes, like let alone an executive or a stakeholder in a 30-minute meeting. Like, no, I would never show them. I could show them the outputs maybe after they've been like made into a cute visual, but like I feel like no matter who your stakeholders are though, like I think you should always think about like assume that they know nothing about data and assume that they know nothing about stats and nothing about AI. Like just assume that and then go into the meeting and communicate in the simplest terms in the most visual way you can. Because like, think about like an article, like, you know, we tend to like articles that have more graphics and for things for us to look at, versus if they were to like write out all the percentages that like this country increased 10% and this other country increased only 5%, this other country increased 3%. It's just way easier to make that into a chart and a bar chart and show that instead. So that's how I would communicate to my stakeholders.
Yeah, no, that's a good final point to end on. Thanks everyone for coming. This has been super insightful, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
Bye.